gentlemen, welcome to this webinar on US-China relations and implications for Pakistan. And this has been arranged by Center for Peace and Security Research. And I'm Naveed Elahi moderating it. And ladies and gentlemen, we are lucky to have with us today the renowned and eminent panelists who are not only experts in their own given topic, but they have the courage and skill to be honest in their views and candid too. They give very balanced views always. They rise above the biases and hidden agendas due to which they have attained credence and acceptance in all circles. So these two luminaries, as you know, are Professor Anatole Levin and Senator Mushahid Hussain Sayed. So I'll give their brief introduction first. As Mushahid Hussain Sayed Sahib is here, so I will start with his brief introduction. Mushahid Hussain Sayed is a senator, seasoned politician and journalist, geostrategist, and an avid writer and reader. He received his bachelor's degree from former Christian College, Lahore, and whereon he went to the United States to pursue a master's degree from the School of Foreign Service in Georgetown University. While studying in the US, he was president of the Pakistan Students Association and was awarded a congressional internship to work in the United States Congress. On return, he became directing staff of Staff College, the country's prestigious training institution for civil service. And he also taught at Pakistan's oldest seat of learning, that is the Punjab University, as lecturer on international relations in the political science department. In 1982, at the age of 29, he became the youngest editor of the daily The Muslim, published from Islamabad. As a specialist on international political and strategic issues, he has lectured widely and his articles have been published in various national and international publications, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, International Herald Tribune, and Middle East International. He has also authored 3 books. He is a member of the Board of Governors of Islamabad Policy Research Institute, a leading think tank. He was Pakistan's representative to the Commission of Eminent Persons set up by the Organization of Islamic Conference for its reform in 2004-2005. He is also the vice president of the centrist Democrat International Asia Pacific chapter. On January 27, 2006, he was awarded Congressional Medal of Achievement by the House of Representatives of the Republic of the Philippines. Currently, he is serving as a senator on a Pakistan Muslim League N platform for Senate of Pakistan. And he has visited China for about 40 times and has first-hand knowledge of the system, and he knows well how it works. So he's also an ardent advocate of Pak-China friendship. He runs a prestigious think tank, Pak-China Institute in Islamabad. So next, the other panelist is Professor Anatole Levin. Anatole Levin is a professor in Georgetown University in Qatar, Doha. He is visiting professor in the War Studies Department of King's College London and a senior fellow of the New American Foundation in Washington, D.C., and a member of the academic board of the Worldwide Discussion Club in Russia. He also served on the advisory committee. I hope you can hear me. Am I audible? Professor, can you hear me? Am I audible?
Yes, you are. At least to me.
And if participants have any problem in hearing, they can always, send a message in this chat box, right? So I was, talking about Professor Anatol Levin. His latest book is on climate change and the nation state. It was published in March 2019 by Penguin in the UK and Oxford University Press. His previous book, Pakistan, A Hard Country, was published by Penguin and Oxford University Press in 2012. He is recognized in this part of the world, especially in Pakistan, for this book, which portrays Pakistan in a very positive light. It's a must read for every Pakistani, as which I've said, Sayed said, he's a great friend of Pakistan. So in those years, in 2010, 11, 12, very turbulent times, he wrote a very positive book for Pakistan, but of course, based on facts. Anatol Levin is currently working on the relationship between nationalism and progress in modern history. From 1985 to 1988, Anatol worked as British journalist in South Asia. He was also posted here. He was based here in Pakistan as well. And he's author of several books on Russia and its neighboring neighbors, including Chechnya, Tombstone of Russian Power, and another book, Ukraine and Russia, A Fraternal Rivalry. From 2000 to 2007, he worked at think tanks in Washington, D.C. And a new edition of his book, America, Right or Wrong, An Anatomy of American Nationalism, it was published in 2012. And he is leaving this Georgetown University soon, and he will join Quincy Institute of Responsible Statecraft next month. So with this brief introduction, ladies and gentlemen, first I would just point out that because this is a very important topic, and it's said that there is no bilateral diplomatic relationship more consequential than one between the US and China, which affects not only these two countries, but the entire world, especially Pakistan. Though Sino-US relations have hardly been cordial during the last 7 decades, the bitterness between the two, I would say, has visibly increased in the last few years. And it was expected that with the advent of Biden administration, there would be less drama and inflammatory statements or rhetoric toward China, but I think the paranoia continues. On the other hand, China is focused on increasing its influence across the world through its Belt and Road Initiative and by strengthening its economic muscle. And Pakistan is sandwiched between these two powers for a long and strong relationship with both of them, with both the countries. Now, when China-US relationship is becoming more bitter, it has become quite challenging for Pakistan, how to maintain an equilibrium in its relationship with both the countries. Historically, we see that China has been more accommodating towards Pakistan throughout. It did not even react negatively when Pakistan became member of CETO and CENTO, which were the organizations to contain communism. So it understood our problems. And on the other hand, I would say, conversely, Pakistan's relation with the US has been fluctuating all along. It was not transactional, but it kept fluctuating. So I hope the panelists will shed light on these aspects and offer some solutions to the taxing issues emerging from the turbulent relationships of China and America. So I think first I would request Senator Mushahid Hussain Sayed to please start his talk. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, and greetings from Pakistan to Anatol Levin, and congratulations to Mr. Naveed Elahi for taking an initiative. He's always been a thinking officer and a very dear friend also, and for launching the think tank. It's a pleasure to be in such august company. And I'm sorry there were some glitches initially because I'm in outside Islamabad in a place called Nathia Gali, so I'm speaking close to the hills and the mountains. And it's very interesting that the seminar is being held in July 2021 on 20th of July. And if you remember, those of you who have read the history, that 50 years ago, on 8th of July, 1971, Dr. Henry Kissinger flew from Rawalpindi Chaklala Air Base to Beijing, then Peking, on a PIF flight, which was a secret flight arranged by President Yahya Khan at that time through President Nixon and with the concurrence of Chairman Mao and Premier Zhou Enlai. And that was the biggest change in the global balance of power then, at the height of the Cold War, when there was a rapprochement between the United States and China, and Pakistan was the pivotal player. We were the bridge in that rapprochement. So we had a role, Pakistan, to play honest broker, bring the two sides together, and that changed the global balance of power. So 50 years later, I think the situation has changed. We see the United States and China at loggerheads, but that's largely the doing of the United States because it seems that there have been preparations made for perhaps a new kind of a Cold War, a new kind of a confrontation. I would just like to set the context of this China-US conflicted relationship as it exists today. The geopolitical context is very important to understand. There is first, of course, the inexorable shift in the global balance of economic and political power away from the West to the East. And now, generally, there's talk of the Asian century. The focus is on the Pacific, Asia Pacific, what America calls Indo-Pacific. So that is the happening place. And the power balance is shifting. Secondly, we see US retrenchment in the broader Middle East, which is manifested in the recent decision to have a military exit from Afghanistan after the US was defeated in the longest running war in American history. And it also marked the formal end of the 9/11 era because the US squandered $6.5 trillion in the so-called war on terror, whether it's Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya, Somalia, parts of Pakistan, the former Fatah, and so forth. And at the same time, we see a reassertion of United States military power and political clout in the Asia Pacific region. And that is where they are trying to focus on China. Then the other trend which we see is also the rise of China. This process has been ongoing. And today, China is the world's second largest economy. And militarily, America is still the #1 power, but economically and politically, China is challenging American primacy, American hegemony, because they see that the Pacific Ocean is no longer an American lake alone. And as Mr. Naveed Elahi mentioned, the Belt and Road Initiative, which is probably the most important diplomatic and developmental initiative of the 21st century, which today includes 140 countries of Asia, Africa, Middle East, Latin America, and Europe. And in that, the China-Pakistan economic corridor is the centerpiece. This whole process of the so-called new war actually began 10 years ago at the time of President Obama. And please don't forget that the team of national security, which is with President Biden, is basically Obama's team. The same team which was there. They were in different positions, but they were part of Obama's team. And Mr. Biden was then the vice president. So 10 years ago, two things happened which were very important for China. Number one was in July 2011, Hillary Clinton, the then Secretary of State, went to India in Chennai, and she announced in July 2011 the launch of what she called the New Silk Road from India, and they said they will move through Afghanistan to Central Asia and other areas. Obviously, we all know that there's only one Silk Road, which started in Xi'an in China 2,000 years ago, which went through Central Asia, parts of Pakistan, Middle East, and then went all the way to Europe. And Marco Polo later on came on the Silk Road. And the famous Muslim explorer Ibn Battuta from Morocco also came on the famous Silk Road. So that long time ago. But that was, so there was talk of a new Silk Road, as if they are having an alternative to what China had assumed was its own heritage. The second important development in 2011, 10 years ago, was when President Obama announced the pivot to Asia. And that was in November 2011 in a speech to the Australian Parliament. And that was the opening salvo of the new activist confrontationist policy to confront China. They felt that China was becoming a stronger country, a new superpower, if you will. And that is how the whole process has begun. So in this context, we see that if China is responding politically and economically, the US is responding militarily. And what has been the US response in this new US-China situation? Basically, they're trying to put a new architecture of security in this region. And this architecture of security includes roping in countries for a military alliance to confront China. We have seen the Quad, which includes Australia, Japan, India, and the United States. And the first summit that was organized by President Biden after he assumed office on 20th January was to have the meeting of the Quad in March. And then a special relationship has started with India. And you can see that India is a linchpin of the American strategy in that they had started off with 3 or 4 agreements. There's the logistics agreement. There is also the communication agreement. And on 27th of October 2020, they had what is called BECA, BECA, the Basic Exchange Cooperation Agreement. Basically means that sharing of intelligence, real-time intelligence in case of a conflict. And so America is now a force multiplier on behalf of India when it comes to India's core interest, security interest in the region. Of course, it is directed mostly against China, but since Pakistan also is perceived as an adversary by India and a friend of China, so we also come in the firing line. So that is the new architecture they have developed, and that's why their famous admiral mentioned in 2016 that from Hollywood to Bollywood, there would be a grand alliance. And then in 2018, the Pacific Command, PACOM, PACOM, its name was changed to the Indo-Pacific. And that is basically now it's talk of an Indo-Pacific region, and that's an official terminology of the United States in that context. So that is how the US is now putting it together. And the latest development is that last month when President Biden went for a summit with the Europeans, with NATO, he also announced a copycat program of the BRI, and that's called Bring Back Better B3W World. Earlier, Trump also had tried that through the IDFC, International Development Finance Cooperation, $60 billion outlay for infrastructure, but it didn't take off. But now I think that Biden has managed to rope in the Europeans also. So they're planning it on a large scale and to compete and to also, it's almost like a copycat program. Now, what is the Chinese view on that? I think we should also see that. First of all, let's look at the Chinese worldview. And the Chinese worldview is being summed up, I would say, that by 2-3 statements, which I'd like to mention, which is very important. The most recent statement was given by President Xi Jinping on July 1st, when just earlier this month, when he had a big celebration meeting in Beijing of celebrating 100 years of the Communist Party of China. And he said that any country that tries to subjugate, bully, or oppress China will find themselves on a collision course against a great wall of steel forged by 1.4 billion Chinese people. So that was a very powerful and a very strong message from that side. And earlier, it was reminiscent of the message which Chairman Mao had given on 1st October 49, when the People's Republic was announced in Beijing. And that he said the Chinese nation has stood up. Because China, in the back of their mind, they have this history of humiliation from 1840, the Opium War onward, till 1949, when they were under foreign domination. They were almost under neo-colonial control. there were fiefdoms, there was warlordism, and China today is a unified country under the Communist Party. And in that respect, China has also taken the initiative of the Belt and Road, and secondly, they have announced that what are their core interests on which they are red lines. So some of the three of the core interests are linked with the Asia Pacific region. One is the South China Sea, the other one is Taiwan, the third one is Hong Kong. Of course, there are others also, Xinjiang and Tibet, but I'm talking of the Asia Pacific, specifically where the competition is taking charge. And China is also building up its navy. They already have 2 aircraft carriers. The third one is going to be launched next year. And there are 3 other aircraft carriers in the offing between now and 2030. So we can see full-fledged competition between the two countries. And in this context, Pakistan's role is going to be very important because Pakistan, of course, has been through this situation before. This was in the 60s under Field Marshal Ayub Khan, when Mr. Bhutto was the foreign minister. Pakistan took the decision that to befriend China when China was the worst enemy of the United States, after Pakistan felt betrayed by John F. Kennedy, that he gave arms to India despite Pakistan being America's most allied ally, and violated the understanding he had with President Ayub that they will never give military support to India unless they had consulted Pakistan, informed Pakistan, and had the concurrence of Pakistan, which they didn't. And Pakistan at that time befriended China when China was also an adversary of the Soviet Union. So we have been through this. And I just like to mention one statement of President Ayub Khan, that when he went to see President Johnson after the 65 war in November 1965, and Johnson said, "You guys are flirting with China. You are a friend of, supposed to be an ally of the United States." And Ayub Khan told him that, "Look here, if we have problems with the United States, we'll damage our economy. But if we try to break with China, we'll damage our national security, and a country will be damaged. So we cannot compromise." So I think that that is the bottom line of Pakistan's strategic worldview today, even almost 55, 56 years later, when if we are forced to a choice. So far, nobody is forcing a choice, but obviously the pressure is going to be on. The one last thing I like to mention is that in the United States of America's Congress, there is the Strategic Competition Act. It's a 270-page document, which is worth a read. I've read all through the document. It has been passed by the US Senate, and it's a China-specific law in the making. And the interesting thing is they have what is called Countering Chinese Influence Fund, which is $300 million a year, which Congress will appropriate to counter what they call Chinese influence. Basically, it will be a campaign of disinformation, propaganda against the Belt and Road Initiative. Already there is an ongoing propaganda, but then it will be more systematic. It will be part of the American system. So this is a very comprehensive plan. It's a recipe for a new Cold War. I think this Strategic Competition Act, which currently enjoys the support of both members of the House of Representatives and in the Senate, and both the Republicans and the Democrats. The only person opposing it is Senator Bernie Sanders, who said we shouldn't have a new Cold thing. So we are setting the stage. Pakistan is also very clear that about the future. Of course, we are not making public noises on it, but we have seen that the United States has taken a strategic decision to embolden, to strengthen, to support India vis-a-vis China. And that also has a fallout on Pakistan. And when there was a China-India conflict in Galwan Valley in May 2020 and also January 21, there was intelligence sharing between the US and the Indian militaries. And now with the new architecture of agreements between the two militaries of India and the US, it is going to continue with this situation. So given this context, Pakistan, of course, would like to continue with its strong relationship. Right now, the US also needs Pakistan for Afghanistan. So that kind of pressure is not there. But overall, we are going to see the fallout of this new conflict between the US and China. But I think the US is a bit late in trying to catch up with China in this region, because Central Asia, republics, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Pakistan, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, or Iran, and even Afghanistan. And whoever comes to power in Afghanistan, they will be keen to have Chinese investment and Chinese support and be part of the BRI. So I think that It's going to be an interesting situation, but the US is on the wrong side of history. They're making a mistake to have this kind of confrontation, because the days then when it was a sole superpower, they have come to an end. History has to move on. It's a world of a multipolar world with different competing power centers, and they have to cope with China's power and China's influence, especially in Asia, which is where Pakistan and China belong. I thank you for your patience, and I thank Naveed Elahi Sahab I look forward to a fruitful discussion with other distinguished members and panelists. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, so far, Anatole Levin has not been able to, we can't hear him, we can't see him.
Please tell Anatole to use the Pegasus software. They can tap phones all over the world. Why can't they just get through?
Somewhere, I think he was traveling, but he was.
I see.
Give us the time, but this is probably because of this internet and this technical glitch that we can't.
Okay, we understand that.
What we can do is we can, there are so many participants here. I can request them to ask questions, and so you are here to answer them. So, first question I've already received from Mr. Mushahid Hussain CB of Third World Solidarity UK.
Yeah, Lashari Sahib is a friend in London.
And he has asked the question to both the panelists, but for you, why we are so dependent on USA in all walks of life, while we were part of NAM, non-aligned movement, for many years?
Well, I think the dependence is mutual also. Yes, we have been part of the American camp during the Cold War period in the 50s and the early 60s. But then from 60s onward, we on a relationship with China despite American opposition. Pakistan in 1973 under Mr. Bhutto, we supported our pilots, our army fought. We are the only non-Arab army to have fought against Israel in the 1973 October war. Our pilots were with the Syrian Air Force, with Egypt also. And in 1984, despite pressures from America, we refused to take on Iran. So I think we have taken that position. We have been dependent. Economically, we are still dependent. And militarily, we are no longer dependent on the United States. And politically, right now, the US is more dependent on Pakistan because of the regional situation. So that dependence has been there historically in the 50s and early 60s. But now the situation has changed. But yes, there is a relationship now with China, which has basically supplanted that special relationship with the United States. But with the US now, that kind of dependence is no longer there. Of course, the US is still controlling institutions like the World Bank, like the IMF, like the FATF, even there is this element also. We feel, of course, we have had our own mistakes also in FATF. We should have done house cleaning, which we didn't do before. We are doing it maybe under pressure of being prodding. But that kind of dependency relationship has now changed. But that is true in the early part of Pakistan, in the 50s and the 60s, that dependency was very pronounced. But then we enlarged our options in the 60s. And I think that we continue to do so. And that is why we are today China's best friend, and China is Pakistan's best friend, despite American animosity and opposition. And one other thing I like to say, we still made the bomb despite the American opposition. So our dependence in America did not prevent us from promoting and protecting our national security through the nuclear program under different governments, at least for 24 years, from Mr. Bhutto till Mian Nawaz Sharif, when we detonated the bomb in 1998.
The next question is,
thank you.
Mr. Tariq Khosa, who was a former Inspector General and Director General of FIA also, and he's a prolific writer and security analyst now. He says, who do you think is responsible for Dasu attack? And how does this affect CPEC progress? From Tariq Khosa sir.
Tariq Khosa Sahab is one of the most outstanding and brilliant police officers produced by Pakistan. He comes from a very distinguished and learned family, whom I know very well. And I was always advocating in our system that Tariq Khosa Sahab is a person who should be Pakistan's counter-terrorism czar. And if he had been in charge today, the Dasu culprits would have been, the Dasu attack would not have taken place. because it was a failure and breach of security and intelligence also on our part, and B, the culprits would have been caught by now. I think the Dasu attack is part of a pattern where, at least in my view, India has already announced that they have launched an undeclared hybrid war using Pakistani facilitators or extremists for that. But basically, it's also a failure of our own security system, our own intelligence. And I feel that when we have two security divisions, SSDs, special security divisions, we have such a large intelligence network. This was something which should have been avoided, and it has had, I think, devastating psychological consequences, because it has instilled a certain fear that the Chinese personnel and the Chinese projects in Pakistan can be vulnerable to this kind of. This is the most successful attack against China on Pakistan territory so far, because they have had casualties. But please don't forget that this is a pattern. Last November, there was an attack on Serena when the Chinese ambassador was in Quetta. Then there was an attack on the Chinese consulate general in Karachi. Then there was an attack on the PC Hotel in Gwadar, and Gwadar is the centerpiece of CPEC. So I think that it shows that there are lacunas in our security system, there are lacunas in our intelligence system, coordination, and those lacunas have to be there. But it's very clear India is on the war path vis-a-vis Pakistan, and especially vis-a-vis China, and they're going to use all the means at their disposal, whether it's information warfare or whether this is this kind of hybrid or low-intensity conflict. I think, unfortunately, we'll see that, and I hope that it doesn't spill over into the Afghan situation also, and otherwise the regional situation. Thank you.
Another question related to this question, and it has been partially answered by Mr. Javed Manzoor. China reacted quite sharply and harshly over this tragic dust incident, in which Chinese were also killed. But this is not the first time Chinese have been killed in a terrorist attack in Pakistan. What's the underlying reason for this irritability this time, but for the Chinese?
I think there were other incidents. There was long incident in Waziristan where some Chinese were kidnapped, and there were one or two incidents where one or two Chinese were killed. But this time also, you see, the question was, there was I think the language use was very strong, even by Chinese standards, because I think the first statement that came from Pakistan was almost a statement of denial. We said, oh, there was an accident, rather than an incident of terrorism. And the accident was that the bus fell into the ravine and something. Actually, it was a full-fledged terror attack directed against the Chinese convoy going to the project site. And initially, the Foreign Office statement denied that. They said it was the bus driver spun out of control and it fell in a ravine and there were accidents. So it was presented as an accident when actually it was an act of terrorism. I think that infuriated maybe perhaps the people. But I would say that on the whole, if 9 Americans had been killed in Pakistan, or 9 Britishers had been killed in Pakistan, all hell would have broken loose in the American Congress, and the Western media would have gone to town on Pakistan. The Chinese, given the context and given the situation, how this act took place, by and large, the Chinese have been restrained by international standards, but not so restrained by the standards of our bilateral relations. And I think I can understand that reaction, given the context. And I think we made a mistake, and we should have admitted and accepted our responsibility and fault, rather than trying to present it as something which it wasn't.
I think next question is from Mr. Tariq Parvez. He had been a very illustrious police officer, and
oh yes, yes, yeah. I know Tariq Parvez Saab also. Yes, yes, yeah. Very illustrious, and we were together a couple of seminars. Yes, a very distinguished person. He was head of NECTA also. Yes, yes. Tariq Saab. Yes.
Right. He asked your comments about President Ayub telling President Johnson that if we leave US, we suffer economically, and if we leave China, our national security threatened, is still relevant. Is it possible to still strike a balance between our relations with China, between China and US, or we'll be forced to, side with one?
First of all, I would like to pay my compliments to the courage of people like President Ayub and also Mr. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto in those 60s, when the world was seen in clear and black and white terms, and Pakistan was seen as the most allied ally of the United States. Please don't forget, in the 60s, we were giving a base to the Americans, Bada Bear. In the 60s, we were part of CENTO, Central Treaty Organization, along with Iran and Turkey and the US and UK. We were part of CIETO, the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, along with Thailand, Philippines, and again, US, UK. As people used to say, we have a disease called pactitis. We are part of every pact that the US has launched. So we were very closely embedded in the American system. And despite that, and let me also remind you, Tariq Parvez Saab, that Ayub Khan, as a protest, did not attend the funeral of John F. Kennedy. Kennedy was assassinated in November 1963. He sent Mr. Bhutto there to represent him in the funeral. He said, I will not go because Kennedy has betrayed me. So I would say that the situation which can change is it's based on reciprocity. If the US is willing to strike a balance between India and Pakistan when they see relations in the region, then I think Pakistan would be willing to strike a balance between the US and China. So it takes two to tango. I don't see the US striking a balance. And even I would like to mention Trump, just before he left office on 20th of January. On 13th of January, 2021, the Trump administration leaked the American latest national security strategy, in which they said it was very India specific. We will build up India, the Indian military, and that strategy has not been renounced by the incoming Biden administration. So given this context, when the US is determined to rope in India also, to build up a coalition against China, which will have consequences for Pakistan because of our own Pakistan-India connection. And we know what India is up to in the region. And this, especially this Hindutva crowd, has a certain bee in the bonnet about Pakistan itself. It's not just that they're about to see as a rival or competitor. It's about to damage Pakistan because they have an ideological foreign policy, like Bush had, George W. Bush after 9/11. Ideological foreign policy where we talked of excess of evil and Islam and so forth. This Modi and company have an ideological policy towards Muslims, towards Pakistan. So I think in that context, unless the US is willing to maintain a balance between Pakistan and India in the context of the South Asian subcontinent, it will be very difficult for Pakistan to maintain the kind of balance. And so I would say that what President Ayub Khan told Johnson in November 1965 would probably be the bedrock of our worldview, our strategic outlook as of today. It may be unstated, but that is the fact.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Sir, next question, Dr. Sayyid Elahi has sent me this question, that during the Cold War era, USSR had locked horns with the US and the European countries as well. But China has made the European countries its partner in the Belt and Road Initiative. So would US stand alone in the conflict with China?
You see, there's a very important difference when we talk of the new Cold War and this thing. I would like all of you to read one article, which was one of the most outstanding articles I've seen in a long time in the American media. It was written by Fareed Zakaria in the January-February 2020 issue of Foreign Affairs. It's called The New China Scare. Fareed Zakaria, January, February 2020. And another article I would like you to read is The Myth of the Chinese Debt Trap, which came in the Atlantic, which is a monthly in Washington, and which came in February 2021 by two American writers, one a professor from Harvard and one a professor of Johns Hopkins. And they said, they've debunked that. The one difference between China and the Soviet Union when it comes to confronting the US in the Cold War is the Soviet Union was militarily strong with a political clout and also as a leader of the communist world, but they did not have the kind of economic strength which China has today. That is a very crucial difference. The Soviet Union was weak economically, but very powerful militarily and also influential politically. So China has the economic clout. Now, for example, you mentioned Europe. Italy is a part of the Belt and Road Initiative. The Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, AAIB, when they launched it in 2017, Obama administration, the administration, 2015, sorry, Obama tried that European countries should not join. Italy joined, France joined, Britain joined, Spain, all the Europeans joined. So you see, the economic clout is there. And today also, China in November had an agreement on free trade agreement with the European Union. They also had the RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership with the Asian countries, which includes Japan, which includes South Africa, South Korea. So you can see the reach of China is amazing because of the economic clout. China cannot be ignored. So because of economic reasons. And that is a problem which the US is going to face. And the US is not able to cope with this kind of situation. And that is why I say the US is on the wrong side of history. I'll just narrate a conversation which was there when President Xi Jinping and President Obama had a meeting. It was in California. It was about 2014 or something. And Xi Jinping told Obama, look here, we are both important powers. Let us try to cooperate. Let us try to compete. But let us not have a confrontation policy, because Asia Pacific is a large area. The world is large. We can share things and do things together in partnership. But whether it's the coronavirus pandemic, whether it's the Belt and Road Initiative, you can see that. And now I've mentioned the new law which is coming up in the US Congress. So the US is determined, it seems. And my view is, I've lived in the US for about 4 years. I was studying in Washington, DC. I worked in the US Congress as an intern. And I know a little bit of the American system also, I think. I was in Georgetown University School of Foreign Service. There is what President Eisenhower called in his farewell speech in 1960, the American military industrial complex. It's a machine war which needs to be fueled and oiled by some kind of a new enemy. They had the Soviet Union in the Cold War, then they had Islam in the 1990s and after 9/11, and now they are looking at China. And China also is very important because China, I think there's also an undercurrent of racism, because China is a non-white, non-Western country. And don't forget, in 1883, the US Congress had passed the China Exclusion Act. They said anybody from China cannot come to America even as an immigrant, while they were welcoming immigrants from all over the world. So they had the China Exclusion Act in 1883. Please, let's not forget history. So the undercurrent of racism is also there, in my view, when it comes to dealing with the new Cold War, because it's a non-Western power and the system works. And one last thing I like to mention. People talk of the Communist Party of China, dictatorship. There is the ASH Center, ASH, in the Harvard University. They had a public opinion survey published in July 2020, and you won't find it in the American or Western media. They did a survey of Chinese public opinion. 32,000 Chinese over a period of 15 years were asked about the Chinese system, the Communist Party of China. Did they express satisfaction or a great amount of satisfaction? Over 90% expressed satisfaction. This is an American public opinion survey, the most definitive on China, done by Harvard University. I won't find it in the New York Times. I won't find it in The Economist, because this is unpalatable. Because in their worldview, China is a bad guy. China is a dictatorship. It has to be demonized. It has to be damaged. It has to be destabilized if they can. So that is the problem.
Thank you. Sorry, Senator, because Professor Anatole Levin is not here. You have to bear the burden of all the barrage of questions.
You are the boss. It's a police show. The cops are in charge, and I have to follow the rules and follow the orders, sir. You are the bosses.
Thank you very much, sir. Next question is from Naveed Elahi from New York. How do you see the plans of the expansion of China's occupation into Taiwan in relationship to a potential threat to Pakistan's sovereignty?
I don't see, I think that the Taiwan issue is greatly exaggerated. China will not use force in Taiwan. China, there will be saber rattling. And I know a lot of Americans, a lot of Westerners talking of a conflict. Not at all. I'll give you an example. My first meeting with President Xi Jinping, and I met him 5-6 times, was in 2010. I met him for 1 hour. He was vice president then. but he was the heir apparent because they announced their leadership 3-4 years in advance, and he had been announced as the leader as vice president, and he was going to be the next person after 2 years in 2012, after Hu Jintao would retire. So I met him in the Great Hall of the People for 1 hour, and I met other leaders also, Hu Jintao and Jiang Zemin. I found him a leader with a difference, and we talked. He had no notes, no advisor telling him in his ear what to say. And I asked him about questions about China, China's future. He gave me an outline of China for the next 40 years, he said, from 2010 to 2050. He said in 2021, we will eliminate absolute poverty because that is the year of the 100 years of the Communist Party of China. Then in 2049, he said, we will celebrate 100 years of the People's Republic of China. This will be a level. He said, one thing we will not do, we will never use force outside China. Or of course, Taiwan is seen as a province of China, but they said never use force. And for last 40 years, since the reform and opening up of Deng Xiaoping, which started in 79, China has not gone to war. The only last skirmish they had was with this India, which was provoked by India after India's annexation of Kashmir on 5th of August 2019. So I don't see China doing what Russia did in Crimea or what India did in Kashmir or what the Americans did to the Muslim world after 2001. So I think that talk of Chinese use of force on Taiwan is exaggerated. Thank you.
I think I'll take another 2 questions and that will be all. Mr. Assad says that often US echoes that China is aggressively following debt trap diplomacy and Pakistan will be an eventual victim of it. Your take on this hypothesis? Please.
I would say that don't follow what I'm saying or don't follow what others are saying. Just follow. And just follow the article of the 2 American writers. They published in the Atlantic, 6th of February, 2021, The Myth of the Chinese Debt Trap. And please, the article is about Hambantota, the port of Sri Lanka, because that is where they talk of debt trap, that what the Chinese, with empirical evidence, with research, with facts, with data. And this is Americans, not any Pakistani, not any third worlder, not any Chinese. 2 American professors, one from Harvard, one from Johns Hopkins. They have debunked through documentation, and they call it the myth of the Chinese debt trap. Please read that article, and you will find the answer to the question. I'm sorry, this propaganda is so much, and it extends to all. I've been a journalist also, and I've been also involved in propaganda once upon a time as an information minister. I know what propaganda means and how it is done. But the Americans, of course, once they decide that somebody is the enemy, then they go for them hammer and tong, which they are unfortunately trying to go against the Chinese. So that is, in my view, a myth, and that has been debunked by American scholars also.
Thank you very much. I think I will wrap up here. And a few months ago, Professor Anatole Levin shared his one article with me titled "Keeping Cool About China." So he wrote a very, balanced article giving some good advice to the US. I would like to just read out the last para of that article so that his sort of participation is done here. He writes, the competition with China cannot be won by the sort of systemic knockout that finished the USSR and that the USSR dreamed of inflicting on the West. Its most important aspect is the relative success of the 2 capitalist systems in terms of economic growth, the maintenance of social stability, and ability to cope with new crises. This is indeed where China, as a successful capitalist country, is a more serious challenge than the USSR. For the USA to compete successfully with China in these areas does not, however, require more warships, more CIA operations, or more money for Voice of America. It requires long overdue reforms at home. So this is what Anatole Levin said in his article. I can Mushahid Saab, we have lost him. And in any case, we are going to wrap it up. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so very much for being with us. And I'm so grateful to Mushahid Saab and to Professor Anatole Levin, though he was not visible and we couldn't talk because of this technical glitch. So it was indeed a very, very interesting and engaging discussion. And Mushahid Saab has explained all the contours and intricacies and complexities of the topic very deftly and candidly. I wish Professor Anatole Levin was also here to talk. So on, and I would say that the questions raised by the participants were very pertinent and provocative. So on behalf of the Center for Peace and Security Research, I am thankful to the worthy speakers and to the participants. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.